I've been hearing a lot about Overwatch's apparent resurgence. You've probably seen it too. The headlines, the many YouTube videos, all stating that Overwatch is back. Whether it's related to the perks update or dropping the 2, Overwatch is making quite a comeback within the gaming space. It's seemingly a common thing within the industry. Some broken game with more broken promises realizes its potential, or more likely the company does damage control and gets positive PR for it, despite being the ones having released a broken product in the first place, which still contain the problems inherent to it. Blizzard has once again done another round of PR which has seemingly made the casual community regain faith in the product. However, if you are more than a casual, you'd probably agree with me that nothing of substance has changed. The game, from a competitive perspective at least, has only gotten worse. Let's back up a bit here. Just how did we get to this point? Overwatch was released in 2016 to critical acclaim, still being the only esports title to win Game of the Year. And it's perfectly understandable why. Overwatch, from a game design perspective, is basically perfection. A culmination of millions of dollars spent and the passion of several developers. A game like Overwatch is, at its core, seriously a once-in-a-lifetime game, basically perfecting the hero shooter genre. It has a timeless art style and hero visual designs. The actual hero designs of the few heroes on release are also, with some exceptions, near perfect. The game is also perfectly polished. The animations, the sounds, the way Reinhardt's hammer boops enemies, it's all so well made. So, how did Overwatch go from critical acclaim to being dragged as a joke nearly anywhere on the internet? Well, Overwatch was made by creatives, and naturally, creatives tend to move on. Therefore, Overwatch gets a massive content drought, which persists for years and kills much of the interest people had for it, especially among the casual community. But finally, in November 2019, the hard work of the Overwatch developers is finally shown off with Overwatch 2, a new engine upgrade, as well as a multitude of visual upgrades, new heroes, new maps, and most importantly, a brand new PvE game mode. I think you know where this story ends. PvE is cancelled, loot boxes are gone, and Overwatch is now free to play and riddled with microtransactions. And a battle pass. Of course there's a battle pass. This, especially cancelling the PvE, killed the little interest the casual community had for Overwatch. As for the competitive community, and what they thought about PvE getting cancelled,
we do not care.
Of course, what they do care about is all the other stuff. You know, the actual game. Let's talk about that. The new maps released were the second worst escort map, the worst control point map, the second worst hybrid map, the worst being released within the same update, a new game mode which everyone fucking hated. Don't worry, Push is not the most hated game mode for too long, because Flashpoint is released later on. And then comes Clash. Don't get me started. New hero additions are still made without much consideration for how they will actually interact with the game. I cannot be the only one who knew instantly that Vendetta would be banned every game, Plat and below, even if tuned properly, which arguably hasn't happened yet. Hence the high ban rates across all ranks. The 5 new hero releases accompanying Season 1 were surprisingly decent, apart from one very important exception. Domina is, from a design perspective, just about fine. My criteria for good Overwatch tank design has dropped significantly considering recent additions. Her kit to me is kind of underwhelming, which is probably why they felt the need to overtune her to such an extent. Yes, she is kind of OP right now, however I don't believe it to be inherent to her kit. If properly balanced, she'd probably get walked on very easily by certain rush comps, as well as some dive comps. Emray to me is completely uninteresting. Anran is the only new hero I actually like, having a unique and interesting kit which flows together well. Mizuki is a character I haven't made my mind up entirely on. I think his chain ability is kind of bullshit, being too easy to hit and leading to some undeserved punishes. Keep in mind, this is a ball main's perspective. Apart from his E, however, and even with his shift, he seems to have very low survivability compared to much of the support roster. Although it's too early to say, as he might just be too mechanically demanding for the average support player. His standing within the meta might change as more knowledge is acquired. Now, to address the cat in the room. I don't want to be that guy, but his addition seems to me a very money ghoul decision meant for casuals. The funny cat character is in fact, unsurprisingly, very overpowered if played correctly. Infinite flight, as well as a very powerful burst mobility option, which is on a resource instead of a cooldown, is obviously a horrible decision. Punishing the cat is a Sisyphean task, especially on control point maps where I'd suspect he's the most powerful. His ability to pick up allies with an ability and enemies with his ult seems to be an addition purely made for clip farming. I'm sure it'll stay funny forever. Right guys? At least this stupid fucking cat will pay for the next 5 updates. Maybe it could even fund the proper player ban system. Overwatch 2's hero design has generally been piss poor. Adding another character with an easily accessible one-shot, as well as a really good mobility option, the only time she wasn't either hard meta, or at least good in the meta, was when they tried to address her rail and her viability dropped off a cliff.
For the first time in Overwatch history, Sojourn has fallen from S to A to B.
Then there's of course Kiriko, who can still easily 2-tap nearly every squishy across the map, as well as having a winning dueling matchup against every DPS and support. All of this in addition to the most BS movement ability in the game, and you can also, by the press of a button, negate pretty much any other cooldown or ability in the game. Suzu is so OP in fact, that they had to especially patch it to where Shatter Stun is not affected, so that the ult is not entirely useless against the carry comp. She of course sells too many skins to ever be nerfed. Then there's of course the Grinch that stole Christmas. Granted, the new hero additions aren't all bad. Venture and Wu Yang are pretty cool.
We're below you.
I did not even see it. The only really well designed Overwatch 2 hero in my opinion is Junker Queen, who is an actual well designed hero, all except for the shout. But it's 5v5, what can you really do? The single worst thing about this cursed sequel is hands down the format change. You've probably heard it a million times before. Removing one tank and then just expecting the other one to pick up the slack is a miserable experience. Going from 6 players on a team who can all do their own things, make their own plays, to 2 DPS, 2 support, and 1 gigabuff tank is horrible. The tanking experience is significantly diminished as your importance leads to much more focus squarely placed upon you, and counter swapping, yada yada, tank is miserable, no one wants to play it anymore. This can be clearly observed with the queue times, as for me queuing tank in Masters is instant, and queuing DPS in the most populated role in the game takes upwards of 5 minutes. It's not just the tanks that are miserable, as dealing with these super tanks is miserable in many ways for DPS and support too. First off, there are 2 less players on the enemy team you can meaningfully interact with. If a tank decides you should die, you have no real choice in the matter. Also, having a significant tank gap in your game is pretty much unwinnable. If one of your supports are trash, it's difficult, but you can still win. The same goes for DPS. If your tank is trash, GG's. There's also far less ways for creative expression, and playmaking is diminished. Pretty much every fight plays out the same, as the game is less of a MOBA/FPS game and more team deathmatch. Many of the issues with the format also come from the support role, which is present to some of the worst skill to value discrepancies, as misplays usually go unpunished, and there's also all the abilities, which with the press of a button can negate any play. Taking angles and flanking feels much worse and is less effective, due to overtuned and often fundamentally broken support abilities, as well as tanks being nearly impossible to push out of an angle solo. Defenders of the format will state that, well, there are less people now to hold the position you might want to take. My point exactly. They might also say, well, they did add a 6v6 game mode, why not just play that? Let's talk about 6v6. Can we talk about 6v6? I've been dying to talk to you about 6v6. After much outcry from a large portion of the community, 6v6 was finally added as an additional game mode, which was a great thing at first. However, it was released with normal 5v5 balance, just with nerfs to tank health pools and making tank cooldowns longer. So the same busted design is still present, along with other roles not being adjusted, namely the support role, which has unilaterally received numerous buffs throughout Overwatch 2. Also, the Season 9 changes also affect 6v6 arguably worse than the main mode. And of course there's perks, which are also present and have not been changed or tuned for 6v6. Take Ball for example, a character I have some experience playing. Ball gets a perk which allows his fireball to do 120 damage to tanks with each hit. Keep in mind their significantly reduced health pools. As well as a perk which gives Ball his own self bubble, which pretty much completely negates the survivability nerfs he's received in 6v6. Also there's the match quality. You know all of those dogshit plat players who flex their open queue rank? Well, the same thing carries over. Queuing in Masters, you will frequently have matches where there are people who are GM in their role, and players who are legit plats. Also, due to the game mode's reduced player base compared to the main mode, match ranges, at least once you reach a certain rank, are significantly widened, leading to modifying games pretty much every match. That is my experience, though I might just be supremely unlucky. Now with all this being said, it's still so much better than the main mode, as having more meaningful interactions between heroes and tanks not being a role where you have to do literally everything at once, or whilst being called various slurs by your teammates, is a breath of fresh air. And although balancing is really bad, it's still much better than the main mode, as even with 5v5 changes affecting 6v6, it is a far easier mode to balance. 6v6 has received exactly one patch specific to it after its release. Of course, it's completely understandable that the devs don't want to waste time on the most popular game mode besides the main mode. Anyways, here's more stadium changes and new stadium only maps, as well as more heroes with completely unique abilities. That is worth far more dev time than a couple of number tweaks for 6v6, which would take about a day's work. Well, more like 5 minutes. I could do the 6v6 patch. Blizzard, I can do the 6v6 patch for you. Sometimes I feel as though I came in at the end. The best is over. I started playing the game in the Wilderness era at the end of Overwatch 1's lifespan, at a time when I had just entered the PC gaming and had next to no experience with esports titles. It's safe to say I was pretty dogshit, and I only started playing the game competitively in Season 5 of Overwatch 2. The more I played, the more flaws I noticed in the game, but I was sure they'd be fixed eventually. But the more time passed, the worse it got, and eventually I lost faith. Every patch note perplexed me. It's not as if the game was just moving in a direction I didn't agree with, it was going nowhere. It seemed like balance changes were done completely at random, and so then, the game slowly degraded. The game did eventually find a direction. Not a particularly coherent one, but one nonetheless. It's slop. Just slop. Big updates which seek to shake up the game, whether for good or for bad, without much care for the more long-term impact on the game. That is Season 9, the perks update, and now Season 1. The devs have given up on making Overwatch the best it can be, and instead settle on periodic content drops, which will interest players for some time until the next one drops. The perks, for example. They're kinda fun at first. However, they further ruin balancing and further exacerbates the onboarding issue which already plagues the game. Overwatch is interesting to me because it's composed of seemingly simple characters that through interaction with one another have depth. Of course, new Overwatches, perks and ability bloats. Overwatch will most likely never be like it once was. People believe that the Microsoft acquisition would somehow resolve the game's issues. Of course, some of what led Overwatch astray was corporate greed, but you have to open your eyes to the fact that the most impactful missteps were simply developer incompetence. Also, Microsoft does not have a great track record when it comes to acquisitions. They seriously argue that first-party developer games don't sell consoles, despite being the reason PlayStation outsells the Xbox, and the only reason you would ever buy a Switch. They just throw their money around just to then find the talent they acquire. Many would argue that caring so deeply about a video game is childish. I think it's good to care. People don't care enough. I feel kind of greasy just saying this, but it's more than just a game. Still, I will tell you to stop caring about Overwatch, and to put that passion onto something else. You should be happy, you know, to have had something which makes saying goodbye so difficult.